Hello, everyone. We'll just give everyone a couple more minutes to get ushered in, and welcome to our webinar, Leveraging Data and Structured Planning to Make 2022 the Best Year Yet. I'm Stephanie Clegg. I'm your moderator, and we have a great presentation for you. So let's just stay tuned for a couple minutes, and we'll welcome more people in. We'll just give a couple more minutes. We have a great audience here. I'm really excited to start. All right, we'll get started. As I said, I'm Stephanie Clegg. I am with ThunderAct, and I will be moderating our webinar today, Leveraging Data and Structured Planning to Make 2022 the Best Year Yet. We'll be taking your questions at the end of the webinar, so you can put them in the chat box or you can send them directly to me. And with that, I will introduce Steve, who will get us started.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Steve Kornreich here from ThunderAct. Thanks everybody for taking some time out of your busy Thursdays to join us. We're going to be talking today, the title of the webinar, right, is Leveraging Data and Structured Planning to Make 2022 the Best Year Yet. To give everybody a sense of, I think, first and foremost, why we decided to do this is the reality that 2021 has flown by us. Right, today is October 21st, just a couple more months left, right, a month and a half left of the year. And this is really the time of year where most executive teams are getting together to start to draw out their plans for the upcoming year, right, 2022. So what we wanted to do was team up with somebody that understands this world of structured planning, right, has tried and true methods to be able to allow executive teams to have their goals not just come into focus, but to have a roadmap to ultimately execute on them. So we asked the one and only Michael Deutsch to join us today. He'll introduce himself momentarily, but just to give everybody a sense of what is it exactly that we're going to talk about, right? So number one, and this is something I'm personally very excited about, is that we're going to explain what the entrepreneurial operating system is to you. We're also then going to dovetail off of that and talk about how you can leverage data, right? These untapped insights that are trapped somewhere inside of your organization to be able to not just set goals, right, but to have an executable roadmap there in front of you so that you can ultimately achieve those goals. We're going to talk about where those informational assets might be trapped, right, how you can uncover them, and then we'll start to share some success stories around what are the best and highest performing organizations doing in both of these veins, right, structured planning and leveraging data as a guardrail for making decisions. What are they seeing, right? And what are the stories that we can ultimately share with you? So without further ado, allow me to introduce, as I mentioned before, the one and only Michael Deutsch. Michael, if you could introduce yourself to everybody, that'd be great.
Thank you so much. One and only. Sounds so nice. Thanks, Steve. So my name is Michael Deutsch. I am an EOS implementer. What's that? Everyone asks. I get asked the question all the time because no one really knows what EOS is yet. But in short, what I do is I help business owners and I help entrepreneurs and I help leadership teams get what they want from their business that they're not getting right now. And I do it by helping them to implement EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system. And I'm going to give you a little bit more about what EOS is in a couple of minutes.
Excellent, Michael. And I'm Steve, right? Steve Kornreich. And as I mentioned before, I'm the director of sales over at ThunderAct. I'm coming to this conversation today having spent the better part of the last decade or so inside of the startup ecosystem. The thing that excites me most, right, about a conversation like this is that I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, right, when it comes to talking about both planning, execution, and companies that either are leveraging their informational assets well and those folks that aren't. So this was sort of a natural fit when we started talking about potential conversations and a webinar that we could ultimately have, and I'm super excited that you're all joining us today. Michael, I'm going to pass over the reins to you with the webinar, and I think where I'd like to start here is for you to explain to everybody, what is EOS?
What is EOS? It's a great question, right? So in short, EOS is a framework or a methodology, I guess, for how to run an efficient business. I guess if you cut out the jargon, it's really a practical system with some really simple tools to help owners entrepreneurs, business leaders run a more efficient business, run that business that is going to help them to accelerate performance, accelerate growth, hire the right people. Overall, it's going to help them to essentially solve problems in the business. Ultimately, that's what we're looking for, right? So there we go. So before we talk about how we actually solve those challenges in the business, let's talk about what is actually solved by EOS. So typically what we're doing is we're solving people's frustrations, right? What do those frustrations look like? Well, number one would be a lack of control. Tell me if this rings a bell. It's when you feel like you don't have enough control over your time. It's when you don't have enough control over the market, the industry, your company. You feel like your business is controlling you, and you need your life back. You want your life back. You're stressed. You're anxious. I often hear this in the "I wish there were three of me" comments. That's the frequent one over here about control. Profit is another big one. Simply put, not enough, right? People need and want more profit, and they're frustrated that they're not getting it. People, they're frustrated with the people that are surrounding them in their organizations. They're frustrated with their employees. They're frustrated with their customers. They're frustrated with their partners. You feel like no one's listening to you. No one understands. No one's following through. No one's accountable. No one's on the same page. What does this look like? What does this feel like? This one is really when owners and leaders are micromanaging because they feel the need to insert themselves into every single situation when we really should be just delegating and letting the team handle it. Another frustration is, let's see, moving forward, there we go, is hitting the ceiling, right? So hitting the ceiling is really when you've stopped growing. And this could be company-wide, it could be personally, it could be just departments within a company. But no matter what you do, no matter what you try, you can't seem to get to that next level. You just feel overwhelmed, confused. You're really not sure what to do next, which is kind of the next one, which is just nothing is working. No matter what you try, and you've tried a bunch of things, nothing sticks. You feel like you're spinning your wheels. You're desperate for traction, right? So those are the frustrations. That's the what we're solving. As for the how and how we do what we do, really what we're doing is back to that practical system with some really simple real world tools and helping you to solve those problems. And that's the beauty of it, right? It's simple. There are no magic pills. There are no silver bullets here. EOS is just a solid system to help you recognize where you're struggling within your organization. And the best way to actually look at EOS is to just take a look at the actual model itself. And the model comes from a couple of discoveries. First, that business leaders, entrepreneurs, owners are dealing with a ton, maybe hundreds of problems all at the same time. And this could be anything from payroll issues to customer service issues, product and service delivery issues. It could be AR, AP, it could be sales issues, and all of these issues all at the same time, and they're overwhelming. But to the extent that you can actually strengthen 6 key components within your business, these problems tend to fall in line because at the end of the day, they're a root cause of the problems that fall into these 6 key components. So the EOS journey is to actually strengthen these components. And we're going to start at the top over here with vision, right? And we start with vision because that's really what we're talking about today, right? Vision is about getting everyone on the same page in the organization with where you're going and how you're going to get there, right? So it's not just the leadership team here. This is the entire company. Where are we going? What do we need to do to get there? People is about getting great people in your company to achieve this great vision that you just defined, right? Here's the specific rub about people though. Every company defines great people differently. So we have to cut through a lot of those generic terms that we typically use, the A players and the superstars and the rock stars, to really understand and define what makes a great player on your specific team, because every culture and every company, regardless of what industry you're in, has a different definition of who is a great player on that team. So we introduce tools to cut through those terms to really define what top producers look like for your specific team. Data, and something that we're going to talk a lot about today, is really running your business on hard facts and numbers and figures instead of what a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners do, which is feelings and emotions and egos. I often hear, especially when I'm starting with newer clients, I often hear things like, those numbers look good, or those numbers feel good. And I always chuckle, I always laugh, and I always end up saying, what do you mean they look good or feel good? They're numbers. Numbers don't look and they don't feel. They either are good or they're not. So we get to the point with our clients where we're really relying on real data with real goals and real measurables to determine success in the organization. And to the extent that you can actually strengthen these three key components, the vision, the people, and the data, everything starts to become transparent, crystal clear, and all of the problems and issues begin to jump out at you. And this is where we actually have to start getting really good at problem solving within the business, right? Because to achieve success in your business, you have to be great at identifying the problems as they arise, solving them at their root cause, and making them go away forever. Process is all about getting all of the most important things that you do day in, day out, all of your processes, all of your systems, getting them done the right way, the best way every single time, because this creates consistency, it creates scalability within the organization. That makes things easier to manage. Frankly, it makes things more profitable too. And finally, it all comes down to traction, which is really bringing it all down to the ground, bringing the vision down to the ground so that you can actually execute on it day in, day out with focus, with discipline, with accountability. Because if you can't do that, vision without traction, it's just hallucination. It's just this idea in your head that you can't actually move forward. And so these 6 key components are really a way of harmonizing and orchestrating all of the moving parts of your business and helps you run this better business, and quite frankly makes you live a better life, right? Because things become easier. And so really what we're going to do is we're going to start by taking a look at this vision component, because that's what we're talking about today, which is how do we get solid on using data to predict and understand where our business is going, right? And to do that, we have to start with having a vision. And so we do this by asking 8 questions. The 8 questions are: what are your core values? What's your core focus? What's your 10-year target? What's your marketing strategy? What's your 3-year picture? What's your 1-year plan? What are your quarterly rocks? And what's on your issues list? And we keep these in a document that we call the Vision Traction Organizer. And so you can see that this is really a concise way of keeping track of all of these 8 questions. And so if we take a quick look at these and we start with the core values, what are core values? They're essentially the set of guiding characteristics that define who you are and what you want from the culture of your organization. We go through an exercise to really discover the true core values of your specific company, because when we actually start talking about people, we're going to see how we use these core values to attract the great people, those people I was talking about before, the right people for your organization. These are the people that you want to attract and be surrounded with. At the same time, these core values can actually repel the people that aren't a right fit for your culture. So they're critical. Core focus is really the sweet spot of your organization. And we've heard this called a million things. We've heard this called mission statement, vision statement. Dan Sullivan calls it unique abilities. Jim Collins calls it hedgehog concept. We call it core focus. And once it's defined, the trick is to stay laser focused within the core focus, so you're always working within the sweet spot of your business. 10-year target is really the long-range business goal for your business, right? This is the number one goal. The number itself is a bit flexible. The number could be anywhere between 5 and 30 years. That doesn't quite matter as much. What really matters is defining this long-term goal, because once it's defined, it's the number one thing that we're focusing on within the business. This is what we're driving towards. And that brings us to actually marketing, right? Marketing is all about getting you on the same page with, there we go, with who to talk to and what to say to these people to maximize sales and marketing efforts. And there are 4 parts to this, right? There's the target market, which is really the demographic, the geographic, and the psychographic profile of the kinds of people or companies that we need to be laser focused on in order to achieve our vision. The rest of these questions over here are all about branding and messaging. So 3 uniques are: what are your differentiators? What 3 things make you different than your competition? Proven process is a visual illustration of what you do for your customers from the second they start thinking about working with you until they're long-term partners and clients of yours. And the guarantee is really just your pledge or your promise that reduces fear of adoption, or I guess it can eliminate objections, however we look at it. But actually, if we take a look at this, what you'll see is if when we answer these first 4 questions, what are your core values? What's your core focus? What's your 10-year target? And what's your marketing strategy? What we're coming away with is really understanding who we are at our core, what we love to do, what we're best at doing with our core focus, where we're going long-term with this 10-year target, and how we're going to get there with this marketing strategy. Now, all of this is all conceptualization, right? This whole left-hand side over here is all conceptualization. It's getting the ideas out of your head and putting them on paper. right? It's taking this vision and starting to create this vision. But we need to actually start driving this down now. How do we start accomplishing that vision? So we drive this down with a 3-year picture. The 3-year picture, as you can see, is not a detailed 3 to 5 year plan. Really what we're trying to do is get every member of the leadership team and eventually the company to crystallize and visualize what the company needs to look like in 3 very short years, because it happens faster than you think. And if you can do that, the chances are significantly higher that you can actually achieve that vision. So what we do is we start by defining 3 data points: revenue, profit, and a measurable that's specific to your organization. Then what we do is we define 5 to 15 bullet points where we work together to paint this picture of what the organization needs to look like in these 3 short years to actually achieve this vision. What we start doing here in this 3 years actually drives and is the foundation for setting this 10 or hitting this 10-year target. And when we actually have a great 3-year picture over here, what we get is the benefits of this really are when you see it, you can achieve it again. It's back to seeing it in your mind's eye, but it also sets you up for great 1-year planning. And so the 1-year plan is similar in the sense that we start by agreeing on those same 3 data points. It's the revenue, the profit, and that measurable that makes sense for you. And what we achieve in the first year lays the foundation for achieving the overall vision, because you can see that the 1 year moves us forward towards the 3 year, which moves us forward towards the 10-year. They're all little steps forward in this larger picture that we're trying to maintain discipline and accountability towards driving to. Right. So
So,
once we actually,
Michael, real quick here.
yeah, please.
It's the analogy that I've always thought of in going through this process myself, right? With other executives, CEOs, CFOs, CMOs, right? The entire management team, we get in a room together. When you start having those conversations about the 10-year vision of the company, right? What are we all here for? What are we all working towards? It's sort of that opportunity to dream a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But what I've always felt in those situations is that when we stop at the 10-year conversation, we're kind of sitting there staring at this massive wall, right, at the end of the day. And if you take that conversation forward, right, and are providing connective tissue each and every step along the way, meaning that in order to be in a good position to achieve the 10-year vision, the company needs to look like this in 3 years. And then having really hard conversations about then, in order to be in a good position in 3 years, what do we need to do this year, right? You need to make sure that there's that connective tissue, right, which I think can be really, really challenging. But the other side of that is that I've found in going through this, that massive brick wall that we're standing at, right, the 10-year vision of the company that we're trying to complete, it becomes much more palatable. And when we start thinking about the 1-year plan and those quarterly initiatives, right, you're going to refer to them as rocks, I think, here, that brings to the surface this idea that how do you build a massive brick wall? Well, you just have to lay one brick at a time, right? And I think, to credit Will Smith, I think Will Smith was the one who ultimately said that. But that's what it feels like in going through that process. Is that what you feel with your clients in going through this exercise?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. As we teach it, so the 10-year target is really this big, hairy, audacious goal, as Jim Collins calls it, right? It's that BHAG. It's that we're dreaming. It's we're shooting for the stars, right? And as you say, it's the connective tissue that takes us from, really what becomes a daily and weekly activity list or tools that we use on this daily, weekly basis, straight through to what quarterly rocks, and we'll talk about that in a second, to that 1-year plan, which takes us to the 3-year picture, which takes us to the 10-year. It's all steps in between. When I work with my clients, I often use an analogy. It's a story that actually is true, which is, I started skiing, and bear with me for 1 second, but I started skiing at the age of 24. And when you start skiing at 24, you have this really healthy fear of falling. When you're 4, you don't care. You're 2 feet off the ground. It doesn't matter, right? At 24, you get nervous. So I'm standing at the top of the bunny hill, essentially, and my best friend was a phenomenal skier, and he's like, "Hey, come on, let's go." And I was petrified. At the end of the day, he comes over to me and he says, just focus 6 feet in front of you. Don't worry about we know we have to get to the bottom of the hill. Don't worry about that right now. 6 feet in front of you. Just focus on 6 feet in front of you and deal with the rock or the ice or the child that just shot across from you, or whatever it is that you have to deal with in the immediate. You'll deal with that. And every once in a while, peek up and make sure you're going in the right direction, that you're not going off into the trees. You're not going to hit a pole. You're not going to, hit a snowboarder who just decided to sit down in front of you or something like that. You focused on going in the right direction, but you're just focused 6 feet in front of you. It's little baby steps. It takes you a little bit of the way there each time. And if you just focus and deal with what you need to deal with each 6 feet, you're eventually going to hit your goal. And that's the example that I typically use because it really illustrates the point of we have this long-term vision, but there are things that we can do in the immediate, and they come with challenges, right? They come with rocks, and they come with moguls, and they come with ice, and they come with all of these things that we have to deal with, but just deal with the 6 feet in front of you while maintaining the vision on the long-term goal. So anyway, so if we take a look at that, right, we just talked about, again, the 1-year plan, and that is the connective tissue into the 3-year picture, which is that connective tissue into that 10-year target. And again, we set priorities here, and when we're setting priorities and we're setting goals, we're setting 3 to 7 priorities specifically. We're not setting 23 or 37 because less is more, and we want to maintain focus and we want to maintain discipline. And if you set too many goals, well, when everything is important, nothing is important. So we really need to maintain that focus and that discipline. So we're setting 3 to 7 goals to maintain that focus, that discipline, and those priorities. And like we said, we're bringing it down a little bit further. There is connectivity between 1 year to 3 year, but we need to have connectivity into the 1 year. Otherwise, it's just too long to grasp, right? It becomes this idea that we put on a piece of paper and stick on the wall or stick in your drawer that you don't actually touch for a year and a half, and it surfaces. Oh, what was this? I remember this, but I never did anything with it. So we actually take it down into what we call quarterly rocks, which are just 90-day business priorities, and it's all about getting the team, getting us together, working on what's most important over the next 90-day period. What do we have to get done? We're creating this 90-day world with focus on what actually needs to get done in the next 90 days to move us forward on this 1-year plan. And so we go back to those data points, the revenue, the profit, and the measurables, all right, and we set those predicting what the next 90-day period is going to look like. And then we go into 3 to 7 priorities for the company and for each of one of us individual for the coming 90 days, right? And we're setting those, again, focused priorities to move us forward towards that 1 year, which moves us forward towards the 3 year, towards the 10 year. We're creating that discipline, that focus, and accountability so that we're actually executing on that vision. And then, as I mentioned before, we actually have to start capturing issues, right? And so that's really what happens here is we have issues that pop up that prevent us from hitting that vision. And this is where we have to capture them, because if we don't capture the issues and we don't talk about the issues, how do you solve them? If you don't know that they're there, how do you take care of them? How do we make them go away forever? And so you can see it's a really simplified approach that we're taking to strategic planning and getting everyone on the same page, right? And once we're all on the same page, we can jump back into this vision component of ours and actually get everyone sharing this vision within the organization so that everyone understands the plan, understands the vision, and is moving forward and executing towards it.
So, Michael, this is now a question that I have for you, right? You go through this process with your clients all the time. And now, as far as like where we are in terms of the time of the year, we spoke about this at the outset of the webinar. A lot of management teams are getting together, right, to start to do the planning for the upcoming year. What, in your experience, are either the conversations or the effectiveness of implementing EOS? What are the differences between an organization that has data presently available to reference as you go through this exercise versus those folks that maybe have it but don't know how to use it or look at it or analyze it? Are there things that stand out to you there?
Yeah, so typically what we see is, again, you get that big, hairy, audacious goal, right? That 10-year target is that we're shooting for the stars. These are our dreams. When you start drilling it down, the companies that are really data-driven have much more specific milestone steps in between. They know exactly what they need to accomplish, what they're capable of accomplishing. The companies that don't, that are not quite as data-driven, they still have these goals. The goals are a bit more of educated guesses. And when we go through EOS, we're teaching how to leverage data. So when we initially start, they're much more of educated guesses. What does this 1 year look like to get us to the 3 year? What does the 3 year look like to get us to the 10 year? They're a bit more, again, of that educated guess that needs refinement over time once they learn how to better use the data to really predict where the company is going and what's realistic and how we can actually become more efficient as an organization.
Okay. And in that vein, I mean, a conversation that we have pretty regularly, right, with our clients and our prospects is really posing the question around this notion of data and the story that it tells, right? And most companies, by the way, for those that are joining here, have the data at their fingertips. But the better question is that whether you have the data or you don't have the data is, are you listening to it, right? To what extent do you have the ability to sink your teeth into those informational assets in a way that allows you to make very clear decisions, right? In terms of setting your 1-year goal, setting the quarterly rocks that are critically important to achieve that 1-year goal. And most companies don't, right? So that's really where ThunderAct comes into the picture here, right? So whereas Michael, and by the way, I think you did an excellent and very eloquent job of explaining to folks what EOS is, we can be sort of the supercharge, right, to those efforts in an ability to give you a clear line of sight with respect to not just what are the goals that we're lobbing out into the universe here, but are the goals that we're lobbing out into the universe the right ones? And B, how do we actually set up our teams, right? The people that report into us that are going to be executing on the achievement of these goals day in and day out, week in and week out, month in and month out. How do we set them up in a way to be able to drive repeatable processes, right? Michael, something that you mentioned before, in order to gain traction to ultimately achieve that vision, right? So again, this idea of connective tissue between where ThunderAct and EOS can sort of team up to be delivered into an organization to deliver results. And that's ultimately what this conversation is about here today. So I mentioned this, as I started talking just a minute ago here, is that more often than not, information does exist inside of the organization, right? It's trapped inside the 1, 5, 10, 15, 25 different SaaS tools that your departments and the folks that work inside of those departments use every single day, right? Your CRM, your front-end marketing tool, your project management suite, your product management suite. There's a whole host of information, right, that your organization can ultimately sink its teeth into. The two problems with it, and one of them is on the slide here, but the first one is that no one's leveraging the data at all, right? So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that even if you are, oftentimes it's siloed, right? And Michael, I'm sure this comes up in your conversations quite a bit with your clients, where you have these cross-departmental challenges, right? And folks pointing the finger, and people can't really get on the same page for one reason or another. And the reality is because that information that's trapped inside of these systems is siloed within those departments. So product has one view of the world. Marketing has a very different view. Sales has a totally different view. So it begs the question, how do we share information cohesively, tap into insights in a reasonable and easy way to cut down to what a former COO of mine used to say is getting to the real, right? Understanding what's truly important to our organization and how we can drive things forward that are attached to our quarterly rocks, our 1-year plan, our 3-year picture, and our 10-year vision. So, right, this information, as I just touched on, is really needed in order to make those decisions with a clear set of eyes and a clear head and a clear heart, right? So how do we do this? That's where we come in, right? So ThunderAct, for the folks that are out there, you can think of us as a decision intelligence tool more than anything, right? There are business intelligence tools and then decision intelligence, which is certainly where we live, which, by the way, we'll be coming to you with another webinar in the next couple of weeks here, so stay tuned for that. We're going to talk about business intelligence versus decision intelligence. But what we do is that we give our clients the ability to unlock the information that resides in those systems cross-departmentally to get people moving ultimately in the same direction. So whether this is trapped inside of your CRM, your front-end marketing tool, your product management suite, your project management suite, whatever it might be, we give you a really cohesive and easy to use way to understand what are the patterns, right, in terms of long-form text. What are the patterns in terms of the conversations that we're having with our clients, our prospects, our partners, right? People that are coming in for support tickets, for example. We not only visualize that, but we're going to give you an understanding as to whether that has a positive or negative impact on the organization, and whether that sentiment, as far as whether it's a feature request or a problem or an issue, is positive or negative as well. And we can track your progress over time. We take this a second level and actually give you some actionable insights, right? So it's not only pointing to the what that's going on inside of your organization, but the why and ultimately how you can right that ship. Can we standardize process for our individual contributors? Can we standardize the way in which we are responding to specific questions, objections, or issues that our clients and prospects might be having in order to achieve positive, predictable, positive outcomes? And it allows us to quantify, right, what's actually going on underneath the hood. So we're gonna be able to integrate the data sets across all of those different data sources to point to not just the what, but as I touched on a moment ago, both the why and the how. Some of these common use cases, right? Traction. I wish I could say that that was on purpose, right? To be on brand with Michael and EOS. But that was actually a pre-existing slide that we had, right? But it's certainly to be able to dig into, where we're seeing traction and how we can repeat it. Customer maturity, NPS, retention, making sure that our sales folks are making promises that our product and our customer success team can ultimately execute on. But it also allows you to sink into some of the measurables, right, that Michael spoke about before, avoiding costly vendor relationships, right, that aren't contributory to what it is you're trying to achieve in your quarterly rocks or your one-year plan or your three-year picture. Explore new revenue channels, right? We're going to be able to surface some of the feature requests and opportunities that the product folks can ultimately build that are going to be able to deliver increased revenue across the organization. And we can prioritize that with, again, a clear line of sight and no ego. Product market fit, competitive market fit, and then to avoid churn, right? As I touched on a moment ago. We are able to do this, right? I'm not going to read all of these to you folks, but I think the number one thing is that we are able to really analyze the employee and customer interactions, right? This is the important one because you're able to get unmatched insight into what's going on a conversation by conversation basis and aggregate that in a super meaningful way. And then we could be hyper targeted about the conversations that we're ultimately analyzing, right? So we want to look at the very top of your funnel, right? What marketing is communicating with a potential prospect that lands on your site and is asking you some questions through a chatbot. The way that our sales folks at the top of the funnel are prospecting and the way that they're addressing potential objections, or even the middle of the funnel down, right? Once you have a qualified opportunity, are selling somebody specific use cases, again, we're going to bring some of those insights to the surface that are going to be able to give you repeatability within your processes to deliver those positive outcomes. And the important thing, as I mentioned before, right, it's not just the what, but it's the why, the how, and those actionable insights as to how you can right the ship. So, Michael, I'll ask this question to you again, right? In terms of being able to deliver and execute, right, on the roadmap that you're going to set through EOS, when you have data at your fingertips, and I'd like to actually go into a real world example of this, right? I know you guys go through as you're setting your one-year plan and then those quarterly rocks, right? You have a scorecard that you go back and you're analyzing, whether it could be on a weekly basis, but there's some recurring conversations, right, that are happening with the management teams, right, where they're looking at a scorecard like this and are going through stuff together.
So before I even get into the scorecard, there was one really interesting point that you brought up, and there are a few things about ThunderAct that I absolutely love, especially for my EOS clients. One of the things that I think is phenomenal is the how, right? So when we look at this scorecard, you can see that there are measurables there. Frequently what happens with my clients is that they don't know how to gather the data. That's a huge problem. They know they have data at their fingertips. These business owners, these business leaders have the data. They don't know how to get it. And that's a big problem. Half the challenge for them, half of it is understanding it. The other half is, how do I even get access to it? And so that's, if we can solve that problem, that's a huge step forward. But specifically when we're looking at this scorecard, we put a scorecard in place to help our clients actually track high level numbers within the business that we're looking forward. These are forward facing numbers. These are not backwards looking numbers, meaning that we're not looking at a P&L over here, which tells us how we did last month, but can't help us predict what we're going to do next month. So when we actually work through scorecards, what we're doing here is looking for patterns and trends that can help us understand where the business is going and how we can take advantage of that. Now, the example that we could use over here is if we take a look at Robert clearly is on the sales side, right? Robert's measure of success is closed business, right? How many business deals can Robert close? Well, what does Robert need to do to close business? He's got to get proposals. Okay, great. How does he get proposals out? Well, he's got to have sales meetings. Okay, how does he get sales meetings? Well, he needs sales calls. So they've determined that 50 sales calls leads to 10 sales meetings, which leads to 5 proposals, which leads to 2 closed deals. What happens if that goes off track? We have a 13-week history at a glance here, so we could take a look and try to spot patterns and trends. Well, what we can estimate here is that if they go off track, right, if we look at the very beginning, we're sailing along at 54, 55, 61, other side, 50, 54, 55, 61, no problem, right? And suddenly they go off track with 32. Okay, great, 32, maybe anomaly, right? People on vacation or holidays or something going on. Maybe we can let that one go. 2 weeks in a row, now we've got a pattern, right? So we have to course correct that, because then we could see that the reduced sales calls actually reduce the number of sales meetings, right? So if we take a look, you go from 8, 10, 9, 8, 8, if we go across, right, exactly, which actually drops our number of proposals down, which drops our number of closed business. You can actually see that reflected in your weekly revenue and your cash balance at the top of the scorecard, right? So most organizations will actually spot this pattern and this trend at the point where weekly revenue and cash balances drop. Imagine if you were able to catch that, 10 weeks in advance, and we can correct that ship before it happens, because by the time you see it at December 16th, you're already 10 weeks into the game. So really what we want to do is not only get access to the data, but really understand how we can use this data to predict what we're going to do in the future and to prevent bigger issues from becoming major challenges, and even past that, to take advantage of the positive trends.
So, and that's a really interesting point here, right? So when I look at this and I think of the application of ThunderAct into Robert's world, as an example, there's some of these weeks here where, activity is one thing, right? And I think the activity in a linear-ish sort of attachment to conversion from sales calls to sales meetings to proposals to one business is only one side of the story, right? Where I think as an executive, if you're the CEO of the company, for example, and you see the week of October 21st, and you're like, well, no kidding, we came up short here, right? You only made 32 sales calls. We didn't have enough meetings to get the right proposals, to get the right deal flow, right? But what it doesn't really give us the ability to sink our teeth into is the qualitative elements of what's actually happening on those sales calls, both positively and negatively, right? So my point being here, just to let me find a good example. We have the week of October 28th. Actually, no, we're going to look at the week of November 25th. His activity was up, but his conversion to sales meetings was incredible, right? It was much higher than the 1 to 5 ratio that we see here in terms of the goals, right? How great would it be for Robert and then subsequently his bosses, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, et cetera, and potentially the board, to be able to understand what's actually going on underneath the hood of those 61 calls that are yielding us 15 meetings, right? Could we ultimately do more by doing less is the question, right? And this is what ThunderAct does. Now, how do we do that? We'd be able to plug into Robert's CRM, analyze the notes on every single one of those calls, and be able to predict and be able to analyze the patterns, right, that he's having in terms of his conversations with prospects. Now, whether it's a phrase, a key word, the way you answer a question, there could be a variety of things here, but we're going to be able to unlock some truth, right, associated with what's actually happening there, so that Robert has the insight to be able to replicate that success week over week, day in, day out, week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter. Now, this gives the actual company, right, the ability to do a few things. When you're unlocking what's happening good, and you can standardize processes across all of your salespeople, all of your individual contributors, in this example right here, guess what? You're now dumping gasoline on a burning fire, right? And you have the ability to scale potentially well past what you've set out as your 1-year goal, because you've now unlocked not the silver bullet, but a process or a mechanism or phrasing or a way to address objections and questions in a way that you now have data supporting you that shows that is leading to positive outcomes, right? Subsequently,
Steve,
Go ahead, I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but there were a couple of things that, as you and I were talking about, how do we actually use this? Where's the benefit? There were a couple of things that really stood out to me, right? Before I said 50% was the how we get the data. The other part of this is, we're compiling data from multiple sources, right? So Robert here is actually the sales leader, right? If we take a look at it from an EOS perspective, we're working with leadership team. Robert could have 10 people on his sales team. What ThunderAct will do for us is actually gather all that data across the entire sales team. You were talking about silos before. You can almost consider each individual salesperson their own silo because each one of them is dealing with objections, dealing with specific scenarios. Imagine if we had the ability to be able to take a look at the big picture, that take each person and compile all of their information to see collectively what objections are we dealing with, how do we overcome those objections, and on the flip side, the people that are successfully overcoming those objections, what are they doing, right? So what we're really doing here is we're driving more efficiency throughout the sales organization. And the part that I love about this is, imagine if we were able to really change these ratios from 50 to 10, 5 and 2 to 40 to 15 to 10 and 5, right? Imagine the cost efficiencies and the greater revenues and profits that come from that just by being more efficient because we're using the data in a much smarter fashion. We have access to the data that allows us to make these better decisions and make our teams more efficient.
And for example purposes, right, we're choosing just to focus on one part of this,
Of
on one
course.
part of your organization, right, sales. And I think sales speaks to a lot of people because it's revenue, right? It's profit. It's what keeps the company's lights on at the end of the day. But this is the same type of insight that you could deliver cross-departmentally, right? Marketing, operations, finance, sales, you name it, product. We can do that, right? Because we can plug into all those different data sources. In the vein, though, right, of thinking of your individual contributors as silos, right? Your sales reps, as Michael mentioned before. What ThunderAct gives you the ability to do is bring to the surface the strengths, the best, the things that each and every one of your individual contributors does best individually, and then give sort of a manual, right, a map for the sales leader to say, well, Annie handles the top of funnel questions the best, right? Here's a list of our top 4 objections. Annie converts those folks at a 50% higher clip than everybody else. Frank, I know, does an excellent job of connecting the dots during discovery calls, right? And when he's presented with XYZ problem or scenario or issue that we ultimately solve, Frank does the best job, right? And I can tell people now how and why Frank does it, right? And we can do this across all 10 salespeople, and you can create a standardization of process, of procedure, of the way we organize conversations to be able to bring to the company the highest level of conversion, the highest level of performance. And that's ultimately what this is all about. So we talked about this just now, right? What having these insights related to these outcomes can mean, right? You supercharge your organization, you can standardize process, right? That allows you to gain traction, achieve your vision, achieve your goals, stay on track with respect to those quarterly rocks. And you can do it in a way that allows you to ultimately avoid a lot of pain, right? So
And run efficiently.
because this is ultimately what happens, right? This is the standard way that businesses operate at the end of the day. They more often than not, and Michael, you correct me if I'm wrong, you do this with a lot of people, right? They're setting goals based on gut feeling. Then subsequently what happens is they end up falling short. And somewhere within the organization, someone goes, wait a minute, let me take a look at the data to really understand what's going on, why it's happening, and how we can ultimately course correct. So then you're forced to reset the goalposts, right? Which, based on that data, if you're leveraging it correctly, will lead to high performance. What we're talking about here, but when combining EOS and ThunderAct, allows you to avoid the painful steps in this process, right? And you set goals that are meaningful, that are achievable, that have a roadmap for success, and give you the ability to standardize process in a meaningful way built on the backbone of data so that you don't have to go through the painful process of having to fall short on your goals, reset them to ultimately achieve high performance. What we want for the folks that are joining us here today is to hopefully walk away from this conversation with an enhanced ability, right, to think about their business in a totally different fashion so that you can set goals, understand what's truly important, have shared KPIs and ownership cross-departmentally to get people moving in the same direction so that you can ultimately achieve those goals at a much higher clip. And that's ultimately what this boils down to. So on that, right, again, it's about enhancing how your organization makes decisions about what to prioritize, why they're important, and your data gives you those guardrails to ultimately do that. And what we're hearing from our clients, right, is that when they use ThunderAct, and I would say that if you're using ThunderAct coupled with EOS, by the way, this first quote here is the one that will really resonate, that you get to cut through the politics, right? Egos get removed, and you're able to set those goals and the roadmap for success from an objective standpoint, rather than one that is subjective and driven by ego at the end of the day. And that is for business owners, by the way, that's where the magic happens. You brought in a lot of really smart, high-performing, impressive people to get them moving in that same direction towards shared goals and a shared vision of what good looks like. That's where the hockey stick growth, right, really comes into play. So with that in mind, I wanted to open this up to Q&A. Stephanie, if you could come back with us for a minute and share any of the questions.
Welcome back.
Yeah, we got a lot of different questions here, so I'm just sorted them out, and I will start with this first one. This one's for Steve. You touched on the sales component of ThunderAct, but how can it help with marketing and generating more leads?
Absolutely. So number one is, I think that you have the ability to dig into sales data, number one, right? So I think of this as a reverse engineering of your funnel, where if you can really understand holistically the challenges that you're solving for your clients and why they bought and what led to pique their interest, right? Feeding that information back into the marketing machine to double, triple, quadruple down on those use cases and target the right people is one area that you can do it. The other thing that you can start to really uncover here is when we're in our pure sense at ThunderAct, I think that the best use case, right, not the only use case, but the best use case is where we're able to aggregate from multiple different data sources cross-departmentally, right? So if we were going to plug into, say, a product management suite where through customer service portals and the questions that people are asking us and feature requests are coming through, if you can then have that inform what product is going to build and then highlight that from a marketing perspective, that's how you then can, again, you're not just building stuff to build stuff at the end of the day. You're building stuff because you know that's what your clients and what clients that walk, talk, and quack like them are ultimately asking for. So it gives you the ability to really tighten your message and be able to deliver a message that is not guesswork anymore, right? It's more rooted in the reality of what the data is ultimately pointing to.
Okay, great. We have one more that's come in. This is also for Steve. When looking at P&Ls, more sales equals more profit, but containing costs is the flip side of that, which creates more profit. Can ThunderAct help me understand my business in a way to help reduce costs?
Absolutely, right? So again, this goes into when you're tapping into those qualitative data sets, it takes the questions out of what should we be building, who should we be working with? And I think to bring Michael into this conversation as well, leveraging qualitative data and reflecting it against in the vision traction organizer when you're talking about your core values and how that maps to your 10-year vision, your 3-year picture, and your 1-year plan. It's about having the right butts in the right seats, right? And I think that when we talk about containing costs, right, this is an interesting area that we didn't talk about really during the webinar at all, but HR and interviewing, right? So the ability to plug into, let's say, Greenhouse, for example, right? The Greenhouse, for the folks, if you're not using it, it's where a lot of companies are managing their talent acquisition and recruiting efforts in. And it's where they log a lot of their notes associated with how an interview goes with a candidate at various stages. ThunderAct, in its purest sense, right, can lock into what's going on in those conversations. You can reflect that off of your highest performers. And when we talk about containing costs, by the way, human capital tends to be the #1 highest cost in most companies' P&L. So being able to replicate what makes a good employee, again, reflected against our core values and what we're fighting for and what the 10-year vision, 3-year plan, 1-year roadmap looks like, allows us to cohesively understand who should we be hiring and why, and where we found success and what do we want to avoid, right? Because what you ultimately don't want to do when it comes to your people is hire someone for what ends up being the wrong reasons. They're with you for 3 months, they churn, you invested all this money in salary, benefits, the whole 9, hardware, software, and you've gotten no return on that, right? So I think that's a good example of a way to control costs with ThunderAct.
You know, Steve, it's funny that you say that because that's probably one of the toughest conversations that I have with my clients, especially when we're going through the VTO, that Vision Traction Organizer. Right? The question that I typically get is, how do I actually leverage my core values to find the right people, right? Because really what you're trying to do with those core values is you're trying to screen for something that's basically subjective, right? A core value. You can give a test for something that is objective. We can give technical tests to understand a technical proficiency in something. It's really challenging to screen for something that's subjective. There's no really easy way to do it. Imagine having access to answers that can help to really understand the people that are that core value fit. What did they say? What makes them that core value fit? If we can take a look at that historically, look at that data and say, when someone answers like this, that's a key indicator that they're on board, that they get it, that they're a core value fit for us. I think that is a huge component because that's one of the biggest challenges. I can tell you from my own experience as a business owner, as a manager, as a person who's run teams, finding that right cultural fit is the hardest part. And I ran technical teams for many years. I could screen for technology all day long. I could look at certifications all day long. How do you know if they're a cultural fit? How do you know if they're going to bring the right value system to your company? How do you to your department? How do you know? That's the hard part, right? So if you have a more objective way of looking at that type of a scenario, it's worth its weight in gold.
Right. All right, I have a question for Michael. What is the toughest conversation that you witnessed with executive teams when going through the VTO for the first time?
So, you know, I actually just talked about that, right? So the toughest question I think is how do we leverage the information that we have for the hiring process, core value fit? I mean, it's between that and how do we make the how do we make the right decisions long term when prioritizing the goals, right? Two things that Steve touched on, right? Those are some of the biggest challenges that we have is how do we actually set correct goals moving forward with the data that we have, right? Because otherwise, as I mentioned before, it does feel like it's an educated guess when you're looking at it through the larger lens of this bigger picture that we want to accomplish over 10, 15, 20 years.
It's and to add on to that, because I've been through this process myself, by the way, with companies, and I'll never forget the first time I went through an EOS exercise, right, with other departmental leaders, other executives, to touch on what Michael said, and I've lived this as well, being on the other side of it, right, who's not running the EOS, but we're there debating what's truly important to the organization. There's so much ego that gets thrown into the mix, right, and it becomes a war, an informational war of sort, an opinion war, I should say, as to whose priorities actually matter more. Is it sales? Is it marketing? Is it customer success? Is it product? And you have to have a good way to be able to cut through that noise to A, set the right goals, but B, make sure that nobody's feelings are hurt really at the end of the day too, because ultimately once you do settle on what those goals are for the year, and those rocks, there's cross-departmental dependencies, right? Oftentimes, me as the sales leader, I can't execute on what we've set out to execute on without assistance from Stephanie, right? So I need Stephanie to feel really good about the revenue goals that we've set out and how we're ultimately going to do it, because there's shared responsibility in that, right? So I think that for me, going through it myself, finding a delicate and meaningful way, right, to set aside those egos. And I touched on this before, like cutting down to the real about what's truly going on and getting people moving in the same direction. That was always the most challenging part. And candidly, I kind of wish that we had something like ThunderAct at our fingertips to be able to remove that noise, right, or muffle that noise, so that we could get a shared understanding of the universe.
Yeah, you know, I'm often the outside objective person in the room, right? That's my role, is to be that outside objective person. I see the egos and I see it all come into play. And, you know, when you can cut through that, and this happens, it does happen, right? When someone brings data to the table and flat out says, look, we can't do that because of, and here's the data to support that. the good and the bad of it, right? The good of it for me is that it cuts through and greases the wheels of that conversation. It makes things much easier. So we set those better priorities and those better goals because the data is there to support it. You know, the downside is, I guess it just makes my job look easy. I don't know, right? Because at the end of the day, it really does set the stage. It eliminates all of the politics of the conversations, which really drive a lot of the pain at the leadership level or throughout an organization. That's that cultural side of things, right? And so we want to try to avoid that. Data really helps to do that.
All right, we're getting very close to the end. So there are a ton of questions, so we will email you the answers if we don't get to your questions, and I apologize in advance for that, but I think we have time for 2 more. So this is another one for you, Michael. How do you at the EOS Implementer help executive teams prioritize what could be too many goals or priorities?
So we always say less is more, right? And I mentioned that earlier, right? So typically we say 3 to 7 goals within a year, 3 to 7 priorities within a quarter, right? We want to do less is more, so we're staying focused and disciplined because that helps to drive accountability. When you have too much on your plate, things just get lost, right? And imagine having that to-do list, that's enormous. Where do you even start? We've all had those frustrations and feelings. So it's really, 3 to 7 goals. Now the trick is, how do you take a list that could be 20, 30 items long and say, okay, these are really important items, all 20 of them, I need to whittle them down to 3 to 7. Well, yeah, right. We have to set goals, and we have to set those goals within the context of this vision that we're talking about, which is that 10-year picture, right? We're going to drive that down to the 3-year, the 1-year, and then the quarterly. And you need to really focus on the things that actually move the business forward. If it's not in your core focus, right? If it's not within the sweet spot of your business and it's not driving your productivity, it's not driving your long-term goals, don't prioritize them. The data really helps to understand what is driving that productivity, what is driving those goals, right? And so having access to that data really helps to understand and keep us focused.
And to add on to that, I think of like the shiny new object, right? And this is twofold, right? Where when you're trying to whittle down to those 3 to 7 rocks for the quarter from the 50, right? That ultimately people are raising their hand saying, oh, this is the most important thing for the quarter. That you have to really be able to answer yourself, is this just a shiny new object, or does this actually make a meaningful dent in our ability to achieve our 1-year plan, right?
Right.
Second to that is that after you've actually set, this is the part that I don't think we spoke about, is that once you've set those quarterly goals and week over week, the executive team is getting together and something new gets introduced, is it the shiny new object, or is it contributory to what we've said are the quarterly priorities for the business? It gives you a really easy way, by the way, as a leadership team to be able to say, that's important and we should talk about this further, or no, it's not related to one of our rocks, so it doesn't matter, right? And Michael, is that how it plays out for you and your clients?
Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to play out, right? Which is keeping us focused, right? We define that whole vision to keep us focused, to know what actually drives us forward so that we are, and shiny new object is the right expression. We use it all the time, right? Is don't be distracted by that shiny new object. It's very easy, especially when things go bad, right? Like COVID, right? So unfortunately, COVID hit. No one could control it, and the entire world shut down. What do? A lot of organizations lost track of what their core focus is, lost track of the sweet spot of their organization and went chasing that shiny new object. And unfortunately, a lot of those companies didn't succeed. The ones that came out of it, and a lot of the clients that we're seeing now on the EOS side, are the people who stayed true to their core focus, who understood what drove their business and understood what was most productive and profitable for them in their business and stayed with it.
So Stephanie, we're on the shot clock here. 1 minute
Yes,
left. Can we squeeze one more in?
This is a rapid fire question. What is the biggest success stories for each of you? You have 10 seconds each.
Right now, I'll go first. Right now, we're working with a client. They have an extremely long sales cycle. They have varying degrees of performance with their individual contributors. They're teaming up with ThunderAct to be able to standardize those processes. I spoke about this before, precisely for this reason, by the way. We're helping them really highlight what individually each of their salespeople does, so that they can train them up for the upcoming year and really knock 2022 out of the park. So that's mine.
Great.
For me, I'm working with a client now, probably about 8 months. They've been in business for 25 years. They kind of hit a ceiling in terms of revenue and growth. And I'm helping them get really clear with their vision and priorities. And what they've been able to do with that clear vision is to review their data and recognize the gaps in their business so that they can actually aggressively address those gaps. And since we started working together, they've actually doubled revenue, and they're on track to do a 5x by next year, by the end of next year, I should say, by the end of 2022. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Amazing. Well, you guys, very good success stories, very motivating, especially as we enter the new year. I want to thank both of you for your time, and everyone who came to this webinar. We will be emailing it, a recording of it, and of course you could reach out to us at any time. And thank you so much.
Thanks all, and thank you, Stephanie, by the way, the unsung hero of this entire process. Thank you.
Keeps it all together.
All right, thank you everyone. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.